and we produce 20% of the tourist development tax. We generate quite a bit of tax revenue for our county. A whole lot of revenue. Perdido is home to bright, committed people who care deeply about our community's well-being and understand its unique needs. Given the chance, we would love to control our own destiny. In fact, our recent PKA survey showed 78% support for municipal incorporation, and we've found the same sentiment throughout Innerarity and mainland Perdido. What if Perdido were a city? We could directly address local concerns. This would reduce the stress on our county and free up resources to be focused elsewhere. Just think, we can build value right here, in our own backyard, and ensure that our planning for growth will safeguard Perdido's charm. We can improve our community in all sorts of ways. We can protect our wildlife and way of life. We need a fire station up north, more law enforcement patrol. We can keep our parks and beaches safe, visitor-friendly, and looking their best. So how would this work? We discovered a model that's used by award-winning Florida cities to keep taxes low and limit government size. It's called Government Light. Think of a bare-bones city government with local control over local issues with no need to reinvent the wheel. Government Light does more with less. These cities contract out the bulk of services to existing providers and manage service contracts to ensure their quality of life at an affordable price, often with less than a dozen paid employees. This keeps taxes low, government small, neighborhoods beautiful, and citizens happy. Beginning January 2023, neighborhood groups will gather in Perdido. We want your input. What problems can we solve? What's important to our community? What should Perdido look like in 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years? Join us to discover Perdido as a municipality. Could we be Florida's next award-winning Government Light city? As citizens of Perdido, we get to decide this, because we are Perdido.
Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Steve Brentro. I am a resident of mainland Perdido, Perdido Bay Country Club Estates. I moved here 4.5 years ago, because I fell in love with this place. And just driving in, you get to Blue Angel Parkway. This is my favorite part. You could be downtown, you could have a stressful day. You get to Blue Angel Parkway, you go past Waffle House, and all of a sudden you're home. It doesn't matter that it takes you 10 or 15 minutes more driving to get home, or even if you get stuck in traffic there, because you get to look at those coastal pines. You're in the middle of nowhere. It's isolated. That's what I love about Perdido. But then there's areas of Perdido, we have communities building up, we've got neighborhoods, we've got business. It's great, it's a mix of everything. And really, I got involved in this effort this last fall when I started to see things changing rapidly. You know, apartment complexes all of a sudden popping up. You know, we had that, the Dollar General on Gulf Beach Highway that people were fighting against, hoping wouldn't happen. New development that's outpacing infrastructure up on 98. It's stressing the natural order and the beauty of our community that we all fell in love with. The reason that you moved here, the reason that your families maybe have been here for generations. So that's who I am. I wanted you to know that about me, that I absolutely love Perdido. And that's why I wanted to invest time and effort in seeing if we can find solutions to our local issues that empowers our citizens to make local decisions over these issues, and maybe even return some of that tax revenue that we're producing back to our local area and strengthen our own community. So thank you for coming. Thank you for investing your time. Thank you for being interested in this. I should not have been, I'm surprised, I'm shocked at how many people came, but I should not have been, because I know that the citizens of Perdido love this place. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll give you the agenda for this evening so you kind of know where we're going. We're gonna hear from our guest, Lynn Tipton from the Florida League of Cities. She is with the FLC University, the education arm of the Florida League of Cities. We're going to do some question and answer. I know that you have submitted questions online. Thank you very much for RSVPing so we could get those collated and figure out there's a lot of duplicate questions you can imagine. And there's a lot of hard questions, and that's okay. We're here to ask questions and we're here to get answers and find out, is this even a good fit? What are our options here? So we're going to do that. We're going to hear from members of our own community right here who have lived here that many of you probably know. We're going to introduce our team. I know everybody's been asking who's behind this project, who's this Steve Brentro guy, we've never seen him before. We've got a great team we want to introduce to you. And we'll give you the game plan and what the next steps are, what we're working on, status report. So again, we're handling the questions that you submitted online with the RSVP. If you did not, there are question cards that you picked up on the way in. We're going to try to address those. You can imagine a large group like this, we could stay here all night. I don't know who was here at the District 1 Town Hall meeting down in, yeah, that was a long night, a lot of questions. So we're going to try to avoid duplicate questions. And I'm going to say this, if you do not hear your question answered, know your question is very important to me, very important. Every single question, every single comment, we are going to submit to the feasibility study firm that starts to investigate with us how might this work so that they know and they're aware of your input and your questions to make sure that everything gets looked at. So without further ado, I want to invite Lynn up here. I met her in researching this project. I talked to the city, future city hopefully, of Siesta Key. Siesta Key kind of has the same thing happening that we do here, and they were feeling the pressures of development, and so they said, we want to look at municipal incorporation. So I talked to them, and they said, you need to talk to this lady because she's probably the smartest lady in all of Florida when it comes to how this stuff works and how these processes work. So put your hands together and welcome Lynn Tipton.
Thank you. Normally, Steve, is that on? Okay, normally, Steve, I would have said, toss me a softball. That wasn't quite so soft to set it up like that, but thank you. Very kind words from Siesta Key. Good evening. On behalf of the Florida League of Cities, I want to say how nice it is to be here and tell you in one sentence who the Florida League of Cities is. We are the voluntary membership association for cities, towns, and villages. Last year was our 100th anniversary. We have an office in Tallahassee and an office in Orlando. I spent my first 25 years with the League in Tallahassee, and the last 8 years have been in Orlando, which means the drive from there to here, I broke it up and stopped off at the Tallahassee office because, yeah, it's hard to drive just that far in one day. In my time at the League, I've been spending about 25 years trying to help communities have the conversation that I hope you're starting to have, and in part, the conversation that I started having with Steve last fall, asking big questions, asking whether or not a municipality is right for your state. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. What a great turnout. And if you've got my PowerPoint up and ready, there we go. Now, I don't have a clicker, so I'm just gonna say next slide. If we can advance. All right. One of the things I'm gonna do, and I can see you pretty well, who's a native Floridian? Nice number, okay. Like me, you moved here from somewhere else, right? Just because I don't want to leave you out. Florida right now is 35% native and 65% non-native. Those are census figures, largely through the University of Florida. So if you are a Gator, you can be excited about that. Most of the data that we count in Florida comes out of U of F. I didn't go to a Florida school, and every football season, my allegiance is available for purchase. So I have to do a little bit of civics for everybody because here's my other raise your hand part. Who had a civics class in high school? Did your civics class include municipal government? It's less than 20 hands. This is where we usually arrive. You would get explained federal, maybe a touch of state, and if you're really, really in a great class, you get that local level. Most of us stop at federal and state. So Florida's Constitution provides for 4 types of local government. And all of us are always in a county, which is the sub-state. The Florida Constitution says the county must be the sub-state and that every inch of Florida has to be in a county, and that never goes away. You're also always in a school district. There's one for every county. It never goes away. You'll always be in a school district. Also, all of us are in at least one special district, which is a water management district. There may be additional independent and dependent special districts. It really depends on where you live, but we all have one thing in common, the water management district. Then you get to an optional level, mandatory, mandatory, mandatory. The municipal level is optional. And in Florida, this is not quite 51%. 49.7% live in the unincorporated part of the state. And it may have a place name and a zip code, but there's no municipal government there. So if you've lived in other states where every inch is in a city, a town, or a village, or if you've lived in states like Pennsylvania where you're layered with a village that's inside a city, that's inside a county, that's inside a township, that's inside a, right? Well, we don't do it that way in Florida. We're a little bit different. And even if, for this conversation, you all choose not to pursue municipal government, it ends up being okay because Florida's a state where, again, we've been about half and half since the 1970s, incorporated versus unincorporated. I have on the slide the notion of home rule. Home rule sounds like you make your rules at home, and it's an interesting shorthand. If I were to describe it to you in a way that rhymes, I would say it's local voices making local choices. Prior to home rule, Florida was a Dillon's rule state, which our neighbor to the north, South Carolina, is Dillon's rule. Their local governments wait 3 to 5 years for permission from the state to undertake a program or a project. And that's what Florida was until 1968. Home rule was put into the Constitution at that time and then codified by the state legislature in 1973. With that, it takes Dillon's rule and it flips it. And it says any county or municipality may enact the laws that it wishes, provided that that law does not conflict with state or federal law. So home rule is available only to a county or a municipality, not a school district and not a special district. Next slide, please. So here's the numbers, and I mentioned those briefly. And if you are from New England, we don't have townships, all right? We just simply don't use them in Florida. There's the stats. Next slide, please. What does incorporation mean? 2 steps. Number 1, the study portion. The Florida legislature realized after about 250 municipalities had been birthed that they needed a process written into state law. And in 1974, they adopted or created Chapter 165 of state statute. And it put together, for Florida, the first real straight process for incorporation with, again, 2 steps. The first, the legislature studies the community. And they do that through a special act that includes a feasibility study and a model charter. Charters are social contracts. It says we the people want to self-govern, but here's how we're gonna do it. That's a charter, it's a constitution. And from the Latin, you remember the Magna Carta from your history classes? Carta is Latin for contract, so social contract. With this document, your local delegation agrees that this local act will go forward to the legislature, and in it, it speaks of what the community's wishes are, what a 5-year budget would look like, what the scope and shape of the government would be, what form of government would be, and all the intergovernmental partners will have been interviewed, the school board, the water management district, any other special districts that are in the area, the county, and the constitutional officers have all been interviewed to discuss the impact that the new municipality would have within the layer that you guys are, that's Escambia. Once that study has been vetted, first in the Florida House and then in the Florida Senate, if it passes those bodies, it goes to the governor for signature. If it passes there, then the local process starts. there's a public education period of time, and then a referenda. And the people who are registered to vote within the boundaries of the proposed municipality are the ones to vote. That's Florida election law. That's not unique to just creating a city. You'd have to be domiciled here to vote here, okay? Just like in any Florida election. And I usually get that question because someone in Ohio owns a condo here, they love it here, but no, they wouldn't get to vote here if Ohio is the permanent home and that's where they're registered to vote. And it is an important distinction. But that local vote is simple majority. 50% plus one, if it passes, you have a new municipality and you get to pick the name, city, town, or village, because under Florida's constitution, they're equal. There's no population threshold. Our smallest population currently is 12 people, no zeros, 12. And the largest, Jacksonville, just in case you're ever on Jeopardy, is about 980,000 people. And somewhere in the middle of that would be, if you chose to create it, would be your municipality. So there's lots of ifs in what I've said, but that's the process in a nutshell. The feasibility study, by the way, is tough for a reason. What the legislature is looking at is more than the fiscal health. They want to know that this community wants to pursue it, that they've done due diligence and homework, that it wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction and somebody wrote up a quick memo and shoved it into the legislator's hands. It takes time. Most things in government take time, and they should take time. And it should be an open process with lots of meetings. When I first started working on municipal incorporation, by the way, it was pre-internet. And people would stand in front of Publix with a clipboard trying to talk to people. Or they'd hold a meeting at a library or someone's living room with Xeroxed copies of information and a big map because there was no internet to share it. So in a digital age, a lot of information could be put out there, but you gotta be careful whose information you're looking at, you know, because it's a lot of facts and a lot of figures. So on the timetable, I should note that the legislature in Chapter 165 stipulates the timing. As you know, our legislature only meets for 60 days. They meet in even-numbered years a little earlier in the year because that's an election year. And in a non-election year, they meet a little later in the year. And so it either goes March to May or it goes January to March. The deadline to file a feasibility study, however, is always the end of August. So that all fall, the House committee can take the report apart and really dive in and look and look and look. So that when the legislature meets, the committee's work is done and the local bill is ready to be heard. Okay, next slide, please. So from your area, if we're talking about the Panhandle, you've got Jacob City and Jackson County in terms of very small. Destin was created in 1984, and that's the Panhandle's newest municipalities. An effort you might be interested in that did not pass was Panacea in Wakulla County. They did take it all the way to the ballot, having gone through the legislature, and the voters chose not to adopt it. So Panacea is still unincorporated in Wakulla County. Now, what size normally goes through? The anomaly in all of this with Miami-Dade, they go through a completely different process and completely different sets of standards, but trying to incorporate over 100,000 people, that's extremely rare, okay? The median Florida city right now, population-wise, is almost 6,500, 6,485. Florida's not a state with really, really large cities. We don't have an Atlanta or a Los Angeles. It takes 2 Miamis to equal a Jacksonville, and even Jacksonville isn't 1 million people. We weren't a state created to really have huge, big cities because they're not around major industrial or commercial issues. If you think about us as sleepy fishing villages, tourist resorts and communities, military bases, agriculture, that's really how Florida started to grow, even before the first of the real other tourists came, right? And so that's where we're at population-wise. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned the issue of choosing the name. The notion of government light or gov light, as the nickname implies, means that it is not a city that on its first day decides to replicate everything or begin everything. These are cities that tend to provide their services contractually, either with a neighboring city, if there is one, or with the county, and in some cases, like in solid waste, even with a private company. So the city does a lot of contract management for the service delivery. However, the goal for incorporating was to have that local voice making the local choice, and the notion of self-government was important enough to the GovLite community that they did not go for a large, complex municipal government, but that's how the nickname GovLite came about. And you see the examples up there. Weston is a good bit larger in Broward County. DeBerry is in Volusia, and it's about 21,000. Fort Myers Beach is less than 10,000 down in Lee County. Policy discussion for the last bullet. You don't need me to read it to you. Next slide, please. So what does the process really mean when you talk about the local phase with the local delegation? Any legislator for the Florida House or the Florida Senate who has a portion of Escambia in it is part of the delegation. It's more than just Perdido and Perdido Key's actual House and Senate members. They are the ones that have to agree to file a local bill. And the local bill is that first step that I talked about, the legislative step. The study itself, 6 to 8 months. I've seen them take a year and a half. It really depends on the committee and the work that they put into it and the data that they collect and the community voices that participate in it. I've mentioned what the special act is. We've talked about the public education campaign at home is helping folks understand the bigger picture. Next slide, please. So one of the first questions most communities ask is, what would the boundaries be? You cannot take part of another municipality. You must be contained within one county. Given that this area is the westernmost boundary, you really can't reach any further to the west, but you also cannot go beyond the boundaries to the east. The proposed population is tough because this is an area that gets seasonal population, right? So you're gonna work off of census data tracts and the available information that the county planning department has in order to arrive at that number. The county property appraiser's office also has a database as to what this area is valued at, and we're not talking market value, but assessed value based for the tax base. What the county uses to calculate, it's what the school district uses to calculate, and it's what the special districts use if they have taxing authority. It's that same data. Next slide, please. Now, one of the other really critical questions that a local community asks during this process is, what are the services that we want? There's already a utility authority providing water and wastewater. Stormwater, if there's already a utility in place, most cities don't find that they need to replicate that. They might need to enhance it, but they don't need to replicate it. This area is already served for electricity, so the municipality is not going to be responsible for starting that. Some of the other questions become police department from scratch or contracting with the county for additional services from the sheriff, which is an option that many new municipalities select. The question of fire service is a little trickier if you're in an area with a fire district, but there can again be the use of another city's fire, the county's fire, or beginning with fire from start for a brand new city. In a GovLite model, that's usually not the case. The desire with a GovLite model is to select an existing provider and work on a contract for those services. One of the draws of becoming a municipality is that under Florida law, all counties and all municipalities have a comprehensive plan, or the comp plan as we nickname it. The comp plan is a 20-year statement for a variety of different elements that take on roads, land use, housing, transportation, education, free space or recreational space, and the like. That comprehensive plan is a way for a community to come together with its own vision and to say, despite the work that the county has done, this is what we really want for this particular area. The desire for a comprehensive plan has driven a number of areas to consider becoming a municipality and to actually achieving a municipality, because the comprehensive plan leads to your own land use codes and land use regulations. Next slide, please. So I asked some of the other tough questions. One of the things this legislature, and I'm speaking of about the last 10 years, political pendulums swing. And this particular decade has been that municipalities should have a mix and not be 100% residential, right? They can't be 100% commercial because you have to have somebody there to be the residents, right? But the legislature believes that a healthy community has a mix of land uses. So in the past, when I first started at the League, we had a couple of communities incorporate at about 3,000 population that were 100% residential because they wanted their own comprehensive plans. But nowadays, the legislature says, where's your commercial? Where's your other types of properties? So that's a question that they ask. The fiscal structure, which is the question that many of you want to know individually, when your community group, or if there is a community group pushing forward, they'll start to discuss within a GovLite model what would be needed to pay for what is desired. And can that be done with a mix of revenue sources other than just the property tax? For example, qualifying for state shared revenues brings a portion of the state sales tax back into the municipality to be spent locally. Right now, the county's share of sales tax money that comes back in the county shared pool is up to the county commission to be spent. There's no municipal decision being made for those dollars. The political environment. On any given day, in any given location, House and Senate members are going to agree on certain things and they're going to disagree on certain things. Local bills are different than general law bills. They have certain priorities each year for an area that they want to achieve. Getting your delegation's attention and holding it long enough to get through a special act is political craftsmanship. And I don't mean partisan, I mean politically working the issue and working all of the details within it. We're all very human, and politics for some, it's a sport. It can be challenging to work in that environment. But in order to create a municipality, that is one of the steps that's required. Next slide, please. Part of the dilemma that I mentioned back in the day was being able to communicate with citizens, with residents, with business owners effectively in a digital age with the hope that most people have access to the internet. That's proven to be a lot more effective than standing in front of the grocery store with the clipboard and the flyer. Some communities meet extensively with groups in their area. They provide lots of FAQs, or frequently asked questions, and they try to find ways to get the information out in a variety of means, whether that's charts, graphs, maps, whatever the case might be. The feasibility study is complicated. It's difficult. Most communities in my 32 years with the League have paid a consultant, because if you get the study wrong, the legislature sends it back and says, try another year. If they find mistakes in it at all, it's proof to them, and you could argue that rightly so, that your group wasn't ready and that the study wasn't well done. So because most groups go with the consultant, the question becomes, how are you going to pay for it? And what kind of a consultant are you going to use? So that's a question every community group has to discuss. I've given a timetable in that this is rarely done in a year. It's pretty much always 2 to 3, as many as 5, or if you looked at, say, Deltona or Marco Island, more than a decade of back and forth, of study, of questions, of meetings, of special acts, of feasibility studies, and ultimately of votes. Next slide, please. The charter, just very quickly, I mentioned it, but these are some of the core things you have to have in it. It's got to have a legislative body. That can be a 5-member city council. It could be a 7-member city council. And by the way, we use council and commission interchangeably. You're hearing me say council most often. That's the word we brought over from Great Britain for the municipal level. It's kind of built into my head. But commission and council get used interchangeably. The form of government is prescribed in the charter. Which form works best? Which should you use? Every community decides for itself. Among 411 municipal governments in Florida, no 2 charters are the same, and they shouldn't be. because no two of our cities, towns, and villages are the same. I've given some reference points there for the model city charter. You cannot use its language, and I'll say that again, you cannot use its language, but it asks great questions. Teddy Roosevelt helped create this group in order for communities to have a guide to have this important discussion. In addition, you can go online and look at Florida's library of municipal charters, and it's a great way to go line by line and do comparisons. Next slide, please. The legislative information that I wanted to provide, Chapter 164 of 65, of course, the House Subcommittee Policy Chief, Eric Miller, that's his contact information. The middle bullet mentions the distance between cities. You're not in that situation in that you don't have another city abutting you. I normally have to have this part of the conversation if I'm down in Broward or Palm Beach counties where they have more than 30 municipalities in their county. But the guidelines that are in there for population density and population are just that. They're guidelines. The legislature has waived them, for example, in Brevard County, creating Grant Valcaria with a population of 3,000. They waived both the distance between cities, the population density, and the population threshold. So these things the legislature is willing to waive if the local delegation desires it. Next slide. All right, I'm usually asked about the pros and the cons. I'll start with the cons. No municipal government is free. No government is free. If you're going to establish a government and services, there has to be a way to pay for it. It does not always include taxes alone. There are often fees, and taxes and fees are legally different things, so I'm being very specific. But not all of it is taxes. So that's usually the first con. The second is, do you need another layer of government? You're the only ones who can answer that question. That's not for the league to answer, and certainly not me because I don't live here, but those are the two biggest cons that are thrown at me. On the pro side, where you've not had a collective voice before, becoming a municipality would give you one voice at the municipal level. If you've got one county commissioner out of 5 in your area, if you look at that at 20%, having your city council be your neighbors, your colleagues at work, your people that you worship with, etc., that's what the municipal level brings you, is a united, cohesive community. As a government, it gets you a seat at the table that you've previously not had, whether that's with your county, your school board, your water management district, your state legislature, or with the US Congress. Also, regionally, it gives you a seat at the table for things like transportation planning groups and other regional entities that come in and look even broader than an Escambia County boundary, but look, say, to the northwest, or in a 3-state area, look at Alabama and our neighbors and start to ask intergovernmental questions. The ability to self-govern and to spend local dollars locally are usually the biggest driving desire behind the creation of a city in Florida today. And to know that the municipal dollars that you pay in are being spent and determined to be spent by people that you know and walk alongside every day. Next slide. Oh wait, hang on, let me go back, sorry, my fault. The alternatives to incorporation. Status quo is always an option. Another is to ask the county to do overlay districts related to services or land use for you. That is not something that you locally would control in this neighborhood, so to speak, but it would still be the county's, but it is something that many communities ask of their county rather than incorporating. The third option is incorporating. Okay, now next slide, sorry about that. Some of the recent efforts that I wanted you to know, and I've included in there that St. George Island didn't get further than their study. It was not introduced into the legislature. And I've given other examples to the committee going even further back in time. Next slide. So I've mentioned these were the ones, I'm sorry, that duplicates what the bullet is at the back. One thing to mention, this is, you know, in government, they say if you don't abbreviate it, you're not trying hard enough. MSTU and MSBU, where a county needs to deliver a service to a specific area, They will often create what's called a municipal services taxing unit, and that is paid for through the property tax. An MSBU, that is a benefit unit, is an assessment. You live on a private road, you want the county to take the road over, they set up a payment as an assessment for every owner along that roadway to bring the road up to county standards. That is an example of an MSBU, and it's done as an assessment. Sometimes there are services that are desired that rather than incorporating, people go to the county and ask for those to be set up. Next slide. All right, I know that there are questions. I hope I didn't go too quickly, but I'm very mindful of your time. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak with all of you and just wish you great success in your conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I can't tell you how much time I spent talking on the phone to her, learning all this stuff, because I didn't grow up here. I grew up in South Dakota on a hog farm.
Well, I grew up in Southern California, but my family's been in Florida since 1978, so neither one of us are native.
Right. Well, and considering time, we don't want to keep you here all night. I know there's probably a lot of questions. Again, if you write them down on your cards, we'll make sure that they get into the mix. And if we don't answer them here tonight, we'll make sure that they get answered somehow. We're working on that. But we want to get you answers because we're an educational organization to provide information to you guys. So these questions are, again, collated from ones that were submitted, and a lot of them, I don't even know what the answer is. I don't know what Lynn is going to tell me. So this is, I'm in this with you. So we'll see what she says. So who would ultimately decide if we become a town or city?
Because it's a two-step process, in order for this to even come to a vote for the people who live here, it first has to go through your local delegation, be supported by your House and Senate members, make it through the Florida legislature, be signed by the governor, and then be brought home for referendum. That ultimate question is left with the people registered to vote within the boundaries that have been established. They are the ultimate determiner.
Okay. And who decides what goes into the new town's charter?
Usually there's a committee that works on that together, and the voters adopt the charter, they amend the charter. It is a referenda-based document, and the amendments to it require referenda as well.
Okay. Who determines the vision for the new municipality, specifically with the town's first comprehensive plan?
Okay, whoever is elected to the council of this new city, town, or village, again, council or commission, they're ultimately going to vote on it, but the process for a comprehensive plan can take up to 2 years by state law, and there are normally a number of public hearings that go into that. Some communities, some cities choose to create a focus group or an advisory group. There are several ways that you can approach it. Some work with a consultant, some pull from neighboring cities and borrow the language, not even neighboring, but just maybe say coastal cities. They borrow from what they see that they like. They put it together, they put it out for public hearing, where there's plenty of opportunity to comment on it and discuss it before the council of the new municipality would adopt it. It then goes to the state for review.
Okay. By the way, there's a comprehensive plan. I can't remember what city it is, but it's in the reference section on our website. If you are having trouble sleeping, it's a 500-page document.
And most of it's in legalese, so yes, it's better than a sleeping pill.
Comprehensive, that's the word. How are local leaders put into place?
So if you picked a 5-member city council, you, the voters, would vote on who those 5 would be. In your charter would be the length of their term, 2-year, 4-year, or the compromise, which is 3 years. And Florida's got a wild mix in all of that, right? 2 is too few, 4 is too many, let's have 3. But the community helps, right? In the writing of the charter, make a decision on that. Once they're elected, the other question for the charter is, are you going to stagger the terms? Say 2 years, and 1 year, 2 seats, 1 seat on a council of 5. You can put all of them up for election at one time, but the ultimate decision is in the hands of the voters.
Are those paid positions, or how does that work?
We have cities that pay their councils, and we have cities that do not pay their councils. In the Panhandle, one of the traditions for smaller cities has been fairly low pay. The league can provide those statistics, but you know, $1,000 a year for being on the city council is quite common, believe it or not. In the very large cities like Tallahassee, you tend to see larger pay. They also attend a lot more meetings than a smaller city would go to.
So it's not a job I get rich in?
Most people don't run for the money at the municipal level. No, they don't.
You mentioned different forms of government. What form of government would the new municipality take on? Like the strong mayor, weak mayor, council manager?
That is up to the people that write your charter. And so it's usually based on lots of community conversations. Of the 26 municipalities that it's been my pleasure to work alongside as they formed and to provide information to, right? All 26 of the newer Florida municipalities have been council manager or commission manager, in large part due to the complexity of government today. And we do have council strong mayor cities in Florida. We also have council weak mayor cities in Florida, but none of those have been recently incorporated.
And if you don't know it, strong, weak mayor, there's a lot of information online.
Yes.
Again,
And we can send you the charts and the language behind that. The notion of a weak or a strong mayor, I just have to say, is not based on their personality. It's what the charter says their authority is. Do they veto? Do they hire staff? Do they fire staff? That's where the difference comes in.
What types of things can new municipalities do?
Well, for one thing, it's self-governing. It's having local decisions locally made. By law, you have to have the comprehensive plan, and your budget must be adopted under Florida law at a balanced level, okay? No debt. If you do take on debt, the budget's got to reflect that the debt is being paid back. So that's state law. Beyond that, it's up to the municipality, but one of the examples is go after grants. Both grants that are available to governments, grants from altruistic groups, for example, like the Bill Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As a municipality, you would have the ability to go after any grant you wish that fit your community's needs.
I think I heard Fort Myers Beach, day one, when they incorporated, had $1 million grant to buy Mound House, an archaeological site, and set up a museum.
And to set up a museum, yeah.
That's
It
pretty
survived the hurricane as well. It's damaged, but it did survive the hurricane. Yeah, it's damaged. So in addition to that, it's holding intergovernmental meetings, I do want to mention, and being able to be a seat at the table for conversations with the other levels of government that did not previously exist. There was no seat at the table because there wasn't a unified group to speak for the community.
Who would be responsible for police, fire, sewer, trash, water lines, all that kind of stuff?
That's really up to the group that writes this feasibility study and the plan that they put forward, because that's what the legislature is going to consider, and whether it's a GovLite model and those things are contractually done, or if there was a decision to do it locally provided by the city itself, that's what's built into the plan. However, once the new council is elected, that's the only group that can determine which of those options will go forward. So I can't answer you on where that would occur, because that's the choice of everybody here.
Okay, and I had read something about a transition. This is my question.
During the
Plan. How does that
transition,
work?
the county's authority continues to be in that area. Normally, the county commission, once the vote has occurred, sets up a transition committee to work on the transition of responsibilities to the new municipality.
Who would be responsible for zoning and planning and code enforcement, and how are those typically addressed in a...
So zoning and land use cannot occur for the new municipality until its comprehensive plan has both been written, adopted, and reviewed by the state. During that time period of, say, up to 2 years, it is still the county's land use and zoning law that is in effect. Code enforcement is different. The new municipality would have to make the decision by vote to engage in code enforcement and then set their standards and then begin to enforce them. Some municipalities in Florida do their own code enforcement, some rely upon the county. There's a mix.
Okay. We currently pay a fire MSBU and a sheriff MSTU. Would those tax items go away, or are they replaced with municipal taxes, or how does that work?
So this one gets a little complicated. Stick with me. The law provides that the things with a T, the tax unit dollars that are levied by the county to an unincorporated area, if it becomes incorporated, those dollars come back to the municipality. For an MSBU, which is done by assessment and not tax, those dollars stay in place with the county.
What Florida municipalities are now operating as a government light model?
That was on the slide, but the examples specifically, DeBerry, Weston, Fort Myers Beach, those are the newest and best of the examples.
Okay.
The one closest to your area in population size is actually DeBerry.
DeBerry.
In Volusia.
Okay. Would livestock, horses, goats, and chickens still be allowed into the town?
Very good question. And again, to the comprehensive plan process, for the up to 2 years it takes to write the new regulations, whatever is allowed in the county would stay. As that process gets going, I'm sure anyone with those particular animals would be working with the committee, writing the comprehensive plan to discuss their desires. It's up to each municipality to determine what is appropriate for each land use area, whether that is residential and what type of residential. For example, it doesn't really work to have a horse in an apartment, right? And even now I'm hearing the debate about whether chickens ought to be allowed on the balcony of an apartment. Chicken ordinances, yes. And many Florida municipalities, this is a very important deal to them because you know the price of eggs right now, right? If you could have a chicken in your yard but not a rooster, would you do it, and what would be allowed? But that's up to the city to set and then enforce. So it isn't something that's going to happen right away. Again, for a new city, this is a process. Just to do the comp plan is up to 2 years. Those land use decisions within those categories would come after that.
Would we get our own zip code and post office? Would we have new addresses?
So if your name in this area is Perdido and there's already a zip code, this is a federal designation and not municipal. Your local congressman could choose to change what the name of the post office is, if so desired, right? If it says something other than whatever your community group picks for its name. What really matters to the federal government is your 9 digits, because that's how they find you, not the 5, the 9. And there's no change to that. You could put a different address right now with your 9 digits and it will get to you. You could say that this is, pick any name you want. It's the 9 digits that matter for zip code. So it isn't so much the name, it's knowing that this is a federal issue and the determination for anything related to the zip code is federal.
So getting we don't actually have a post office in Perdido. We drive to
It's a Pensacola one?
Yeah, it's on the other side of Navy.
Okay, so again, if you wanted one, that's something you work through with your local congressman. And again, being a city council asking for it might be different than, say, just a regular citizens group asking for it, if that's your desire.
Would becoming a municipality impact eligibility for social services like child protective services, elder care services, nonprofit eligibility, homeless? For example, various cities in Virginia have different requirements for social services within the same county.
So Virginia is not the same kind of state as Florida with regard to what the local governments are responsible for. In Florida, municipalities have no role in social services by state law, whether that's constitutional or by state chapter, state statute. It is from the state to the county for the delivery of that mechanism, and it does not matter whether there is a municipal layer or not. Some municipalities are choosing to do more seniors-based programs in their parks and rec, for example, but that's not an issue of eligibility nor qualifying. Those things would remain state and county.
The taxable real estate value of the research area with 20,000 people, according to the site, is $3.5 billion after homestead exemptions. This number grew by 30.5% from 2021 to 2022. That means just 1 mil of ad valorem tax raises $3.5 million for the municipality every year, $500,000 more than it did in 2021. Given this, how would you say that we compare to other towns our size in Florida?
That's really difficult because that's apples to oranges. It's never going to be apples to apples. The Florida Department of Revenue has a database that lists all 411 and all 67 from taxable value, lowest to highest. If you really want to dive into the comparisons, that's worthwhile. What the legislature wants to know is that with 1 mil of property tax or 2 mils of property tax, what would you do? How would you spend it? What services would you provide? How would you govern that money? And coastal communities and their valuations, as you know, can fluctuate and fluctuate greatly. We've all been there through the roller coaster rides over the years and the decades. So again, looking at the number is helpful. Knowing what 1 mil raises, which is 1/1000th of $1 in value. So if you have a $100,000 home, 1 mil is $100.
Of assessed value.
Of assessed value, not market value. We never talk about market value unless you're in real estate. To government, it is the assessed value. And of course, there's the providing of homestead exemptions, et cetera. But if I'm taking the 100,000 because it's easy math, 1 mil is $100. So in the collective, what the legislature looks at and what most people are interested in knowing in your delegation is what would you do with the money if that's what you raised from that tax base. The legislature wants to know that a tax base is healthy and that it has variety in it, that all the eggs aren't in one basket, like all residential, et cetera.
Many worry about high taxes. How do the citizens limit the taxing capacity of the municipality?
So under state law in Florida, you cannot put a cap on it. There is already a cap. No municipality can levy more than 10 mils. The school district is limited to 10 mils and your county is limited to 10 mils. There's nowhere in Florida paying 30 mils, of course, the max anywhere. What you have are variations along that base related to what is needed and the services that are being provided. The question really comes down to what are the leaders like that you're putting into office? If you choose to become a city, the people that you elect are the ones that are going to set the rates for fees and set the rate for taxes. So it really comes back to the leaders themselves and their belief in taxation, their philosophy toward taxation. The other is that in a gov-like model, there is less spent on the government services like police, fire, water, sewer, and stormwater than in a non-gov-like city.
Next page. Can municipalities collect sales and gas tax?
They cannot levy them nor collect them because they're all collected by the state. So municipalities share in a pool, I'm trying not to make a pun, but a pool of gas tax money that is awarded back based on the road miles and the amount you spend on transportation. If the roads in a new city are not the municipalities, but are instead state roads and county roads, that municipality does not share in gas tax monies, okay? So they're not collecting it and they're not using it. On the sales tax side, the state does collect a portion within one of the half pennies that is shared by counties based on population and shared by cities based on population. You have to qualify with the amount that you're collecting as a city in all your revenue sources. But if you qualify for it, then those state dollars come back to the city. They can be bonded for debt and they're available to be used in any capacity.
How does becoming a municipality give us more power to address local issues?
It's a seat at the table that otherwise you might not have even been invited to the meeting. It's having, whether it's a mayor or a council member, a commissioner, attending intergovernmental conversations that otherwise you weren't a part of. It's having a united voice for the residents in an area as a government, not just as, say, a community group, a civic organization. Not that those aren't wonderful and they carry validity on their own, but as a government, it is the level of government closest to the people. And so it unites that voice into hopefully one good, strong, united voice for the community.
This is a good one. We watched Fort Myers Beach in their recovery. Does being a municipality have any benefits or drawbacks when it comes to disaster recovery?
So disaster recovery under Florida law is state to county. Every county is the designated emergency operations center. The cities within that county have a seat in the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. They're there for the dispatching of equipment and for communication. The decision-making, however, is county and state. When the federal government comes in after the disaster declaration and FEMA is there, they obviously work with the state and the county and the municipalities at that point. But disaster response in a declared disaster is county to state. Having a municipal leader can be helpful for the communications portion. It is not directly in the decision-making tree.
Okay. And I'll interject this. I had a brief conversation with someone who's working in Fort Myers Beach. And one of the things that they shared is obviously all the beachfront is leveled down to
It's just so sad.
the concrete. And they're in a unique position because right now they can actually choose their own destiny of how that gets rebuilt. If they were not a municipality, they shared with me that
It would be Lee County that would be making that decision.
exactly.
Yes, sir.
So that from that perspective, it's actually really cool that they're able to choose their own destiny, whether they do that sleeping kitschy, coastal vibe or a
Or
Margaritaville.
high-rise condos or whatever, right.
Whatever they want.
It'll be their choice.
How many employees does Government Light City typically need?
The problem with typical is your smallest GovLight city is about a 7,000 population. DeBerry's at 21,000 and Weston is over 50,000. There is no typical. The issue is you look at the scope of the services and what it takes to manage the contracts for those services. I will say every municipality needs an attorney. They need a clerk, not only for the notice of the meetings, but the keepings of all of the records. If there is a manager on board, that's 3 right there. Beyond that, it's going to depend on the scope that is designed for the services that are desired. But I can tell you that at certain cities, you might have a half dozen employees, and in a slightly larger GovLight city, you might have a few more. It really depends on the scope.
I love this next question. This is a good hard-hitting one. Many citizens express concern that Incorporation would add yet another tier of bureaucracy on top of an already complicated bureaucracy in Escambia County. Does the local government need to be complex? How can a municipality simplify or streamline our situation?
Again, GovLight isn't the only way to go. We've had cities in Florida that have managed to incorporate with different models that work well for them. Because each city picks its own governing structure, the community has to be comfortable with what's chosen. No one's asking from day one that you be complex, but sure, to look at it from the outside and to say, well, the law is this in the city, it's this in the county, why are the 2 laws different? Well, the one group desired this, the other group desired that. You're going to have 2 different laws that aren't identical. The issue of school districts as another layer, of special districts as another layer, I can agree that it can look complex in looking at it. However, when you strip it down to 24/7, 365, are the roads in decent shape? When you turn on a faucet, does the water run? Is the garbage picked up at the curb? If I flush a toilet, is it going somewhere that is safe and viable and not in my yard? Okay, these are really important questions, right? Is there a place that I can recreate with my family? I don't care if it's a county park or a city park. Can my family recreate nearby, right? Am I getting to vote in legal elections? Is that being taken care of for me? These are the questions when you look at the complexity of government and you look to the layer. The issue is, again, for civics, you all raised your hands that you had civics and then all but 20 dropped when we got to the local level. So clearly we're not doing a great enough job at getting civics out there so that folks will understand which government does what, where, when, and how.
How do municipalities work with the school district to ensure a community's proper access to safe, quality education and transform them, in our case, from poorly rated schools into highly rated ones?
Well, it is a different governmental body. So forming a municipality is not going to change your schools. They're different governments created by the state as far as the school districts. That is under all state law. The municipality can work on the access in and out of the school in terms of the roads, crossing guards, and guardians at the schools. That's where the school is involved. Other than that, intergovernmentally, for example, using schools as shelters during a hurricane, cities are very involved in that step. But in the nature of the curriculum, or in the teachers, or in the grade levels and things of that nature, graduation rates, that's not going to be municipal.
Do any cities have charter schools that they?
Yes, we have about 20 cities out of the 411 in Florida that either participate with or partner in a charter school.
And everybody's favorite, the last question on this list, right? Then we'll take a break. In spite of generating a disproportionately large amount of taxes for our county, Perdido's infrastructure is some of the worst in Escambia County, and overdevelopment threatens both our wildlife and our way of life. Can Incorporation impose control or a moratorium on overdevelopment and destruction of the Gulf Coast and Perdido's wetlands?
Wow. So in the 2 years that it takes to write the comprehensive plan and all of the community conversations that go on related to that, when it's time for the new city to write its land use regulations, they can look at limitations on density, building heights, setback, environmentally sensitive lands, wetlands, set aside, etc. In Florida, there are, however, very strong property owner rights. And if already these property owners have platted with the county a development order, what is called a DO, again, abbreviations, I'm so sorry. The development order, if it's already with the county, the new municipality cannot override what's already on the books for the county. It may be that that never comes to be built. The developer may have walked away, lost the money, lost interest, right? But if it's on the books, the municipality cannot change that. However, for the lands that are available, they can work on, as you described it, limitations or limits. Yes, they can do that through the land development regulations.
Okay. Well, that's it for this section of questions.
Okay.
These guys have to get to Tallahassee for first thing in the morning, so they're actually going to hit the road here after a little bit.
Caffeine.
All hyped up. But you brought your driver, right?
Yes. This is Chris Hawley, my Florida League of Cities colleague, and he's going to be helping on the drive home. I will tell him stories, and then he won't fall asleep, right? That'll be the plan. I just want to say thank you for the questions. All of these show to me that you're really doing, if the folks in this room, or even if they're not in this room, you're doing some good heavy-duty thinking. While the league doesn't take a position on whether this community or any community should or should not become a municipality, my parting words are that you know what a municipality really is before you make the jump into the study and the next steps. Because it isn't the county, it isn't the school district, and it isn't your water management district, for example. You really, I hope tonight, if it's become a little clearer what a municipality is, and if not, please get a hold of me, ask me, and let me help explain that part, because the league's interest in it is that you have the best information you can possibly have to make what is a very personal and important decision. So I wish you all the best in your process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Appreciate it. You're so welcome. Thank you.
All right, let's change things up a little bit. I have been practicing for the last few months, learning from her so much. But let's see if I can answer any questions. Craig, is Craig around? Oh, there you are. I'm gonna have my friend Craig come up, and he's gonna ask me some of these other questions, and we'll handle them. I'll do the best that I can, and hopefully they can get on the road, and we'll see how that goes. You might recognize this guy if you've been around Perdido for any length of time, I'm sure.
All right, thank you, Steve.
This is Craig Dalton. He is with, see if I get this, Perdido Bay Youth Sports Association. Right?
That's correct.
Yes. All right.
All right, well, I'll ask a few questions, and Steve gave me the list. This is a final compilation of some of the questions we've already received. So I'm gonna read through them now. I got the handout, and I'm out just over 50, and my eyes are without readers, so we're gonna try my best to get through this for you. So Steve, the first question right out of the gate is, how much will it cost?
How much will it cost? So, you know, we've heard about the funding options and taxes and all that kind of stuff, but this is what the feasibility study will tell us. As we get into this, they'll look at every aspect of what we pay for services right now, what we need as a community, and what our desires are. And they'll come up with some numbers so that we can make an informed decision about that. Likely, we'll see it sounds like we'll see a mix of revenue sources in different areas.
Okay, what are some of the issues we expect to resolve through municipal incorporation?
Okay.
What community improvements might we expect?
So I wrote this down because I wanted to make sure I get everything in there. By incorporating Perdido as a municipality, we could directly address local concerns, as Lynn was talking about, and build value in our community. Some of the things that we could do is ensure that zoning and planning align with our local way of life, improve street conditions for local neighborhoods along with traffic flow. Through planning, we can increase pedestrian safety with sidewalks, crosswalks, multi-use paths, and street lighting. And again, I'll point out, people say, where does money come from for that? Well, a big part of that is with planning. So then as future development happens, it's guided. Maybe new HOAs that are subdivisions that come in have to have sidewalks. That could be, you know, an ordinance. Get a fire station in the northern part of our area, something missing for 5 years. Increase law enforcement patrols as needed. Establish uniform code enforcement to protect property values and beautify our community. And create and implement comprehensive stormwater management plans. That sounds really boring, doesn't it? You drive down you know, the road and you see water in the wetlands. Well, it all has to go someplace when it rains, and a comprehensive stormwater management plan makes sure it stays away from houses and businesses, and it doesn't pollute the waterways as it goes out to the, you know, different places. So each of these obviously could be taken care of by our county, but you know, that creates more stress on the county. And really, a lot of these things, it sounded, from what I've talked to citizens in the community, they're things that they would like to be involved in the decision making of and guidance of. So
I think this question's already been asked, but maybe we'll put a little different spin on it. So what does becoming a town mean for law enforcement, EMS, search and rescue as it relates to Perdido?
So the recommendation, as we've been having initial talks with the feasibility study firms, is that we would contract those back out to the, you know, to the county. So, you know, and we have a lot of flexibility in that.
Another question I think that's been asked already along the same lines as well is, will becoming a city affect public services like water, sewer, trash, gas, electricity? How does that affect Perdido?
So existing public services would continue as they do today, just like Lynn was describing, you know, and we had the added benefit of maybe collecting the franchise fees that people already pay on that.
Okay, possibly, yes. There is 2 questions. Can I ask you?
Yes, there's 2 questions he wants to.
It's an interesting question. I've been asked 100 times already, but why were the map boundaries drawn like they are?
So the map boundaries were drawn specifically to define a research area so we could start to look at population density and, you know, tax capacity. And in that, we were speaking to people in the community and asking, do you consider yourself Perdido? But where is the line in Perdido? I know it's an imaginary line, but if you go far enough to the east, you end up in West Pensacola. Out here, it seemed like people were calling themselves part of Perdido as soon as you hit Blue Angel Parkway. So that's a big portion of that. The other thing is that municipal incorporation rules or the feasibility study dictate that you have to have a cohesive and compact area. Very vague, but then they have like a nuclear physicist that is like drawing circles and doing measurements around your boundaries to figure out, like, Does it fit in this? What does it look like in this? And then they answer how compact and contiguous you are. That's a fun word. Oh, yeah, and that's the other thing is existing districts and boundaries. So you're looking at roads and natural barriers and things like that. So up against the naval base, the state roads, it just kind of makes sense.
Okay, this will be the last question, and this is the long one, but I feel like it's along the lines of others that have asked the same question. It's two-part, one specific, very specific. This first part is while I'm coming with an open mind, now that I've taken part in 2 other local initiatives in the past, which included Brownsville and Warrington, at the end of the day, neither community saw the pros outweigh the cons. Can you comment on that?
So I think as Lynn was sharing, every city, every municipality is different. You know, we're not Brownsville, we're not Warrington. They have different needs than us. You know, obviously the demographics, the finances, the tourism, that's completely different. So, and same thing with Navarre. Navarre is working on this. That's a different animal too. So we really have to figure out what's right for Perdido and focus on that. And if municipal incorporation is a good way forward, let's look at it. And I think we have people in the community who believe that it's worth looking into enough to fund a feasibility study.
All right, and here's the last long question. This person would also like to know how incorporating will survive the cost associated with a hurricane that, say, for instance, would devastate Perdido Key Drive, known as Beach Road, without breaking us at the bank. Especially since, I didn't ask this question, someone else asked this question. Especially since the Florida DOT, who owned it for nearly 80 years, claims that the cost of 1 mile is 2.5 times more expensive to replace than the normal road that doesn't have all the requirements that they do on the beach. That is nearly 9 miles of that road. If that replacement cost were around $4 million per mile, which is a lowball figure according to FDOT, do you really think the residents of Perdido could bear the cost of a bond or a loan with interest of a $40 million tax on a small population?
Do you have $40 million? So both feasibility study firms that we've interviewed so far and have been talking to advise against doing anything like that. If your coastal communities, they said in coastal communities in Florida, you do not want to own the road that's going across the beach. They say that's the dumbest thing in the world you can do. It should stay a state road probably, because whoever owns it at the time it gets destroyed has to pay for it, right? So when it comes to roads and parks and beaches, we don't want to have to pay for that out of our pockets. We don't have, I don't have $40 million laying around. Maybe you do, but so the goal would be to leave those with the existing owners and then help take care of them, help, like with our beaches and parks that, the bathrooms are in shambles. We can help clean them by funding people at the city level to service them or contract. So that's the general idea, but no one's saying to take over all the roads.
All right, Steve, you're off the hook. That's the last of the,
How'd I do?
The questions. Round of applause for Steve. Nice job.
All right, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce someone I met in talking with members of the community. Pastor Buford Lipscomb. Many of you may know him. He's a longstanding member of the community, lives out on Innerarity Island. And I'm so interested to hear different perspectives of people who live here and what they think about this type of effort and what they see in the community. So,
okay. Thank you, Stephen. I tell you, I think we need to give this guy a big round of applause for just putting his neck out on the line, bringing us together, to have this conversation. I know some of you, we don't always get along or even agree on things, but to bring this together, it's amazing. My wife and I lived in this area for a long time. We've raised our kids here, and now most of our kids are raising their kids here. So we know this community. I know many of you, we love this community. For 26 years, I was the senior pastor of Liberty Church here. Just retired 2 years ago, just ahead of COVID. Praise the Lord. And my son Josh now is the pastor. When we first moved out here and built this building, there was no Walmart, there was no Target, there weren't even many storage buildings out here back then, if you can believe that. And like our community now, just like Perdido, we experienced sudden and rapid growth. And it was evident that our leadership structure as it was the church growth was just not sustainable with the growth that we were experiencing at that time. So something had to happen. And what had to happen was change. Could everybody just say the word change out loud? Change. Nobody really likes change. People are afraid. I learned a lot about change being here these 26 years and growing with this community and loving this community. And one of the things I've learned is people don't like change, and people are afraid of change. People are suspect of change and suspect motives with change. I've learned that, but I've also learned that being proactive with change. We were able to harness change and see positive results. And can I say to you, change has arrived in Perdido. That ship has sailed. We don't have to like it or what, but we are trying to take some responsibility. And again, I'm a conservative like many of you. I don't like big government. But at the same time, I don't like taxation without proper representation. And I think we have a great potential and opportunity. And I'm just speaking as a voice of the community here to really have a seat at the table. Lynn was amazing, wasn't she? And all that information, still kind of taking it all in. And I think we could have been even better informed. But I, for one, am enthused about this. And I can say to you, this effort, although I'm no official, have no official capacity, it's not for or against any political persuasion whatsoever. It's not about any personal gain on anybody's behalf. It's about loving our community. And loving Perdido we do. And being able to even see it go to a greater height together. One of the things I'm excited about is simply bringing our community together more so as Perdido, not Perdido Key, not Innerarity, not Gulf Beach Highway or Perdido Country Club, but Perdido, and really being one central community. I think that's awesome. And I think that will carry us a long way in strengthening, no longer being fragmented, but we are so glad that you're here. And I wholeheartedly support this effort, whatever shape, form it takes. But I'm especially proud of the leadership that Stephen has put together. This guy is smart, and we need somebody smart, and he's very flexible, and we appreciate him a lot. And again, thanks for being here and being part of this conversation and helping us see what is next for Perdido. Stephen?
Thank you, Pastor. All right, I'm going to invite up Craig Dalton again. He serves multiple capacities. He can read questions without his readers and can also talk.
I don't even have readers. First thing I'd like to, and because we are in the interest of time and I want to get to the end, but I do want to recognize two special guests. County Commissioner Jeff Bragash, he's in the house, and County Commissioner Mike Kohler, who's also in the house. So if we can get a round of applause, and thank you for coming. Retired County Commissioner Gene Valentino is also here, so if we can get a round of applause. And it's important to have them here to join in on the discussion and listen and learn the same way that we're trying to learn to make sense of this and to provide the right path forward. We've all heard this phrase. It comes from one of my favorite movies, build it and they will come. Well, in this case, don't build it and they're still coming. And we know that change is coming. And some changes we may not like. So this is our opportunity to get out in front of it. This is our opportunity to help dictate our community, Pensacola. Now, with that said, my role is part of the committee is to help keep it within the guide rails, to help Steve set up the subcommittees, the working committees, because there's going to be a ton of them, help them select the people that we need, the experts, to make smart decisions. This is also comprised of three other members. Steve obviously is the chairman of the committee. I'd also like to introduce Mickey Cameron, if she can raise her hand. May Dean, sitting right there as well. Thank you, May. And Annie Griffin. Where's Annie at? They have terrific bios, but what you really need to know is that this is an all-volunteer committee serving you. They've served in the past, and they are on this path together as an all-volunteer committee, which is super important, and they are hoping to attract others to be part of this. So thank you very much for serving there. One last round of applause for that committee. And I'll just leave you this one last thought. And before I do that, I do want to say is I get around this community. I'm a downtowner. I live out in Herons Forest, but I work downtown. Most people would probably consider me a downtowner. And I started socializing this from Gulf Breeze with community leaders all the way to the downtown leadership, stakeholders, the West Siders, and all the way to Perdido. And the common reaction, the common theme that I hear from all folks is, I'm not surprised by this. Why did it take us so long to come to this point? And it really is. Everybody truly believes that. Now, there are things that we have to figure out along the way, and we need to make smart, informed decisions, but that reaction is pretty much universal across the region that we know as Pensacola Metro. Okay, so I'll leave you with this last thought, and there it goes. So, Perdido is truly the western gate to the Sunshine State. Perdido is, where millions live, where thousands live, like millions wish they could. We've heard this before, but it's Perdido. And with that, I would say that we are a sleeping giant. We just don't recognize it yet. And because of that, I say we are Perdido. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. All right. In the interest, we're gonna plow through this. I'm gonna give you a status update, tell you what we've done, what we're about to do, how it can be involved, and then we'll be out of here. All right. What we've accomplished. So over the past few months, we've gathered most of the data needed for our initial 5-year budget plan from both 2021 and 22 tax roll information, population, voter information, initial population density calculations. We're handing all that off to the feasibility study firm that our group has selected. And it's a highly experienced firm with 30 plus studies that they've done, and they're an expert in government light. That's actually all this firm does is government light cities. So they actually did Fort Myers Beach, one of the very first cities in Florida that was done under that model. And we have briefed, this is what got in the news, obviously, but we briefed Representative Andrade and Senator Broxson. And on December 7th, we presented it to the entire local delegation. And we needed to know up front, if they would even consider doing this. Because as Lynn Tipton told me early on, she said, if they're not interested in doing it and taking your bill to Tallahassee, there's nothing you can do other than wait until somebody else is in that seat. So we're very thankful that we were able to go to the delegation and present that to them. Next steps is the feasibility study. So the phases have been laid out by the feasibility study firm are this. Phase 1 is the report detailing the initial financial findings with the study area into a rough draft of a 5-year budget, projected budget. Great part about how they're putting this together is they said we can jump ship at any time. If they find a silver bullet or something, or the numbers don't line up, we say, okay, we did our homework, now we're good to go. So that's phase 1, and then we'll move on to phase 2 if that looks good. And by the way, phase 1 is probably about a month, 30 days. They said they can get those numbers back to us. Phase 2 is they'll present additional findings through the use of a SWOT analysis, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I would love personally, my personality says, this is a great idea, let's just go do it, right? But at the same time, the other side of my brain says, wait, I need more information and I really want to know if this is going to work. So against what that one part of my brain wants is we have to find the weaknesses. We have to see what are the things that actually would make this not work, because we have to know that going in. So that's what we all as a board really valued about this feasibility study firm, is that they're willing to look at that. They're going to base that on information that we provide in our initial research that we've already done, but they're also going to look at public records and interview private citizens, as you guys are going to interview private citizens and government officials. They'll put together that into a report and let us look at it, and then we can again say, does this look okay? Should we go forward? Phase 3 will compile all of these items along with a proposed charter and a complete feasibility report. Now, all of this requires small community meetings, work groups, as Craig mentioned, and then we want to get back together and meet in larger settings like this and update you, like this is this small group who is working on the city charter, all people who are interested in that kind of thing, this is what they came up with and they think this is best. Present it to the group, we'll talk about it. Make sure everybody's on board. Same thing with, the budget and what are the important items in that we want to address? What are the things that we want to solve and focus on? The timeline again is the small community meetings will begin probably in the next month or 2. Larger gatherings similar to this one would be probably every other month. And then ultimately we would submit that feasibility study to our legislative delegation by September 1st. Vote in the legislature, assuming it makes it through all subcommittees and all that process, would be spring of 2024. And then we would be hopeful for a vote here at home at the presidential election in 2024 in November. That's kind of the timeline. So Rome wasn't built in a day. Perdido wouldn't be either. So it's going to take a while. Got to be patient, and it's a lot of hard work. I thought going into this that it would be an easy, quick thing to do. I've already invested 4 months of my time. My wife will tell you. She keeps asking me, like, are you working on anything that actually makes us money? I'm like, yeah, I'm working on this hard. This is interesting stuff. I happen to be in a great position as a small business owner and entrepreneur that I can invest my time in projects that I'm passionate about. So I'm very, very blessed in that regard. And Perdido is something that I have become very passionate about, seeing the health of this community. So, you know what? My daughter is taking a public speaking class, and she would probably tell me this is like the cardinal rule. I'm missing my last page of notes. Oh, well, I'm going to wing it. So now you know kind of the timeline. Get involved if you want to help with this effort. If you just want to stay tuned, that's fine. I understand. Stay connected with our website. Sign up on our email list. We have added, I think we added this on the agenda for tonight. There's a link that you can go to if you want to volunteer. We're getting community organization going. Our volunteer coordinator, who does somebody want to volunteer for that position? So we're still working, early stages. So we will get back to you and we'll work together in this. But we want to do this as a community and we want you involved. So we're really excited that all of you invested your time tonight. And I want to thank you again for being passionate about Perdido and supporting us through this process and learning with us to figure out if this is something that we should do. And together we can be Perdido. Thank you and drive safe.